Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek UK. I'm Siobhan Holt, the news editor for PRWeek, and today I'm joined by PRWeek colleagues, UK editor John Harrington and reporter Eliza Wiredu. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Hiya.
Today we're recording the podcast from PRWeek's measurement conference in central London, which we've just wrapped. It's been another successful conference. People heard from prominent PR professionals who shared objectives and real insight on measurement. So, guys, what did you both make of today's conference?
I thought it was a fascinating conference. I mean, it's one of, we have about 7 or 8 conferences a year, and this is usually one where I'm kind of a bit like, oh, measurement, yeah. I know this is such an in-depth sort of specific kind of area to look at, but it actually each time I learn a lot of new things, and it covers so many different elements. It's one of those truly pan-industry topics, and it keeps changing. And obviously the advent of AI and so on is really shifting things again, which we'll undoubtedly come on to in a bit.
What about you, Eliza? What did you think?
I had a lot of fun today just listening to people talk and learning new things. It's always good to come to a conference and network as well, because you get to meet people that you probably wouldn't have met elsewhere.
I think you're right. I think a lot of people that come along to this maybe, because as John's rightly said, measurement's such a niche area of the business, PR, but it's great that they can come along to a conference like this and really learn from their peers, and also we get an opportunity to meet them. So I think you're completely right with that.
Yeah, niche but crucial. And
absolutely.
Increasingly more so, as budgets are getting tighter, there's all the more need to prove the value of what the industry does.
Absolutely. And obviously the challenges of the recent budget might even tighten the numbers of people in PR. So there's that real worth and showing value.
Absolutely.
So what stood out to you then today, John, from the content?
Well, I mean, there are so many different elements, but some of the sort of sound bites, if you like, that caught my attention. Daisy Hawker-Wallace of Anti-West Coast, she was talking about the hustle and the hassle. So the idea being that you really need to sort of get in there with the C-suite and your peers at other departments and so on to really sort of emphasize the importance of what PR is and what it does. And obviously you do that via showing the measurements. You need to make your internal colleagues really interested in it. Because a hustle is an odd term, isn't it? Because I associate that with a sort of the side hustle and sort of doing something extra outside of your business and your organisation, but absolutely not in this sense. Another speaker spoke about not waiting to be asked to the boardroom, be proactive, sort of make your case with the C-suite. And someone else was talking about, don't wait for perfection, just start. I could imagine that if you're coming in cold to this whole topic, it must be very daunting. But I think you just got to kind of start small and then build up what you're doing and get better at it as you go along, and don't be worried about getting things wrong, because inevitably there's going to be a big learning curve. But yeah, there was lots of very useful advice there, I thought.
I agree. I think that they just get moving on it, I thought was a really interesting angle, really, because measurement can switch and change depending on what you're working on. So just that proactiveness, I quite enjoyed that as a comment from someone. And it was a panel, I think, that I did where they were saying that get in front of the C-suite and just start showing the measurement. I thought that was really funny the way she put it, because she sort of said no one's going to appreciate a report on measurement. You just have to do it, and then through that you can show your value. And someone on one of my panels as well was saying that they had done measurement and then as a result shown that they didn't need to be on X and Twitter anymore, and that had made a business decision, which I think in the current climate, probably there's a lot of people that maybe could show that. So I think it's not just showing what you can do with measurement, but also maybe resources and ways to pull back in PR. So I thought that was an interesting outcome from one of the panels.
Definitely. Someone was talking about storytelling, and this is something that we talk about a lot in PR, don't we? Yeah. We're talking about the PR industry. And that was really the point. It's about making sure that you can tell the right stories from the measurement, the data that you get, to the right people. Most people aren't, if you said, would you like to see some data on earned media coverage? They're probably going to maybe look the other way. But if you can show, look, I've got some data that shows why we don't need to be on X, or why we need to go for that channel and not that channel, or why working with that celebrity doesn't work, then that's how you can get buy-in.
Yeah, and C-suite's going to appreciate that.
Absolutely.
It's saving money at the end of the day. Eliza, what stood out to you?
So I found the insights shared by the corporate comms manager at Essex and Suffolk Water to be really interesting. So during her panel, she reflected on one of her experiences working for a brand with a limited budget and a smaller team of just one, her. And she said, when it comes to improving your reputation, finding resources can be really invaluable, especially when you don't have a lot of resources. Her main points were just to use free tools such as Trustpilot. That was the case study she gave for measurement purposes. I think a lot of people do get caught up with trying to find the flashiest ways to measure. And sometimes something as simple as just doing a quick Google search or looking on Google Analytics can really help your team just figure out where they're going.
I think that did seem to be echoed quite a lot today, didn't it? That you don't need the fanciest of tools and all these different measurements formats. It can be just simply get started, seemed to be the big message.
Yes, I also think these tools shouldn't be rejected. They should be looked at because there are a lot of options out there. And I think we're going to see a huge amount of innovation in these tools as the months and years go on, particularly with AI. But we all know it's changing most things. And, this is going to be certainly one of them. But yeah, certainly goes back to that point, doesn't it? Just sort of start. Don't wait for perfection. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as they say, and just start doing it. I was really interested in the case study from TUI, Amy Dowling there. She was talking about how the use of data throughout a campaign can sort of encourage a shift of focus while it's sort of happening and in the different iterations of it. So they had a campaign with Davina McCall. They started from a very sort of high-spec video and quite a sort of traditional celebrity endorsement, I guess. But then later on, they shifted to a sort of social media-first approach with using influencers and a kind of more informal, behind-the-scenes perspective on it, kind of moving away from the sort of polished editorial. And that was from the data and the insights from the measurement that they were getting, which I thought was fascinating. This sense that it's not just a case of you start, you measure, and then you take it on for maybe a year, 2 years down the line when you look to do a whole new campaign. No, you constantly do it. And this, for me, gets to that point that a few people mentioned that the industry needs to move from a sort of a linear approach of measurement to something more cyclical. You need to sort of constantly measure, learn, and do that as you go along, rather than sort of thinking you know everything from the start and then just getting to the end and say, oh, actually, maybe you weren't quite right about that bit. We'll learn for next time. But then next time, there might be a whole new social media platform that's exploding and there could be all of these other things happening. So I think the pace of change, I really got the impression that the pace of change in the media and in social media, particularly and in technology, is massively influencing the way the industry needs to approach measurement.
Absolutely, and that was definitely echoed by the representative from IKEA as well. Their campaign, their second part that they did with Hope and Glory, they were sort of saying a similar thing, wasn't it? It's learn, adapt.
And interestingly, GCS, we had a presentation from GCS, Government Communications Service. They talk about their measurement framework. There's obviously a lot of detail there. They're ultimately reporting to the taxpayers. So when it comes to sort of their, if you like, end user, we're kind of it. So there's obviously a lot of pressure on the public purse. And they were, again, as well as the commercial organisations, stressing this need for continuous learning and the sort of cyclical nature of it. So I think whatever type of organisation you're representing, it does feel like a kind of universal lesson from conference.
Absolutely.
Another session that caught my attention was the case study presented by Alexia Clifford, the Chief Communication Officer at GambleAware. So during this case study, she kind of spoke about how different brands measure their impact in different ways. So for GambleAware, it was more about changing the perceptions, and that's how they measured success and how they measured how well their campaign did.
No, I think you're right with that, Eliza. It was definitely one that caught a lot of people's attention because, as you say, it's not a case of measuring sales or even trust in some way. That she was sort of explaining that the way the campaign worked was that they had to sort of change media perception to get better headlines, to get better stories read that would then change overall perception. And she was sort of arguing that it can be detriment sometimes to what the organisation's work is, which is to highlight that that there are victims of those that suffer from gambling addiction and not the negative headlines which it can cause. So it was sort of changing media perception to then get the right headlines, to then get people reading the story and change sentiment that way. And that must be a very difficult thing to measure. I think that's what we learned.
Yeah, I mean, specifically, she showed an example of one publication that initially ran with a headline that was quite negative towards the individual, and some would say victim blaming.
Yeah.
And then after discussing with the journalist, they changed it to a more sympathetic headline, effectively. So, yeah, I think this shows that, in a sense, this is old-fashioned media relations, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we should always remember that that's still going to be a very important part of this.
Okay, then to summarise, what was the one thing that stood out at the conference today that people should really think about when it comes to measurement?
Don't wait to be asked with measurement. Try things, and then just be bold about selling yourself and selling the function and using measurement to do that. So I think a lot of it comes down to PR being bold about selling itself.
Yeah, one of the PR professionals said that there should be more pride in PR, and I thought that was a great line. But yeah, I completely agree. Eliza, what about you?
One thing that I took away from this was PRs may need to adapt in order to engage with their audience and stakeholders. It's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. It's very complex depending on where you are in the business and what your business wants its outcomes to be.
And how about you, Siobhan?
I think there was a lot of be braver, put yourself out a bit more, which fits in with what you said, John. Measure towards the objective stood out to me. That was a comms professional from Heineken said that, and I thought it's simple, but possibly something that can be quite easily missed. I think when there's so much coming into the measurement funnel, it can get a bit lost. So always keep the objective in mind. And don't overpromise was what someone said when they were discussing sort of what they wanted from their agencies that they were working with. They used the line that agencies can mark their own homework, which I thought was interesting. So
yes,
yeah, don't overpromise. Key line there.
Yeah, under promise, over deliver.
Yes.
Although maybe that's a bit difficult if you're going into a pitch.
Yeah, that is the whole point. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talking of measurement, there was a fascinating story that we ran on PRWeek this week relating to a local authority. The council there, and it was Cotswold District Council, it's come under fire from the opposition Conservative members for posting job ads for communications roles totalling around £250,000 if you include national insurance and everything else. Now, the Conservatives there are saying that it's an unjustified expense when council costs are being cut elsewhere. But then the response to that has been very much that, you know, if you don't get these services, then the local people are going to suffer. That actually we need communications because it's important that everyone knows what the services are, because if you don't communicate what you have, how are people going to know what's available to them? Which is a really important point. And obviously it's a point that we support, that comms is an investment and should be seen as such, and it's not merely an expenditure. But in my mind, it really gets down to that point about measurement, that actually if you can't prove the measure of something, it increasingly becomes, ironically, a communications issue when it comes to justifying the value of comms. And obviously we're talking about the public sector here, so it becomes particularly salient and political. So yeah, what do you think about this story?
I think it's one of these, and not to criticise our journalist sector, but it's once again a bit clickbaity, I think, because the story was actually that the council's bringing its comms back in-house after almost a decade. So in a way that is going to be more cost effective, but obviously it's very hard to say that to your council members and members of the constituency. They were going to hire for a head of comms, content manager, campaigns manager, digital content manager, and then create a new comms team as well with a couple more members. So yeah, I thought again, without the right comms team, it's really hard to communicate that, I suppose. Hence the reason they're probably making this move.
Yes, it's definitely some irony there.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, I think maybe this goes back to what we've said before, John, that the PR needs to stand up for itself, needs to be a bit braver, and maybe this is another example where we need to sort of say, no, this is justified. Communication is key, and you can't do that to constituents unless you've got the right team.
I think it's partly the sort of the stereotype of the spin doctors. You know, this idea that somehow this council is spending all this money on sort of slimy people in suits who are going to, you know, make a cock-up look like a a brilliant victory or something, which clearly is a million miles away from what the vast majority of people who work in comms do, which is perform a vital service.
Especially council comms.
Especially
They're probably
council
going to sit
comms.
there and say, that's not what I do. I do not do spin.
Well, 100%, 100%. But I think the problem is people don't see it, do they? They see the bin collections, they see the public libraries, whereas this is in many ways an intangible industry, but a vital one. But again, it gets down to that point about, how crucial measurement is and how everyone should see it as an absolute top priority.
100%. Well, moving on, we wanted to reference a study that we published that's got quite a lot of traction on our website this week. PR and comms recruitment business and community platform PR Mums has collaborated with HR platform Platform 55 and has revealed a widespread belief in PR that managers in the sector are not fully equipped to support working parents. One of the stats that stood out to us was that over half, at around 60%, shared the view that managers did not easily implement parental leave or flexible working arrangements, while only 19% believed their managers were capable of handling sensitive conversations related to family and fertility. Now, I must say that the report surveyed 360 respondents from the industry, with 87% identifying as female. But I just wanted to know what you guys made of the study. What stood out to you?
Yeah, well, I think this sort of gets to many of the fundamental stress points about working in comms, really. I mean, like any industry, there's the challenge of adapting when employees become parents and move on to a different stage in their lives. But unlike in many sectors, we know that this isn't a strict 9 to 5 for most people who work in it. It reminds me, having written about things around diversity and inclusion over many years in this industry, that saying about hiring for cultural add rather than cultural fit. So having people with different experiences adding a lot to the culture and the insights and ultimately the quality of what the agency can do, or indeed the in-house team. And this extends to being parents as well. If you're doing comms campaigns and you want to reach people who do have children or have experience of it, then clearly it's good to have those people there with you.
Yeah.
But generally sort of having the more life experience, the better. And I know this is slightly idealistic, but I do think that comms businesses will benefit from having as many people as possible from as many different backgrounds and with as many different life experiences as possible.
I agree with you, John. Like, PR is not a 9 to 5 job, and I don't think it ever will be. You'll never really know when you'll have to work late because your client needs assistance. What I found most worrying is that 25% said that they had noticed discrimination or exclusion towards those who took leave. This can only lead to bad workplace culture, and you're basically isolating your staff. One thing I should add, though, is the gender bias. I wonder if the research would have looked the same if it had an even gender split. But in my opinion, just like John, a diverse team can always offer better services, and it can always have better understanding because there's more people. So my real question is, why push out the parents? But separately, I do think there needs to be a greater understanding for those who don't have children but have different caring responsibilities, for example, families and friends, because it is very complex, the world we live in, and not everyone will have children, but others may have certain responsibilities they need to look into.
Yeah, I'm going to play devil's advocate slightly though on this, just to ask, is this maybe an element of training then for managers? Is it not necessarily that they're trying to make their staff lives difficult? I don't think it's that, but maybe it's more things have changed and that they're just PR professionals, and trying to balance that team. Meeting the needs of every employee can be a real challenge, and obviously if you've not had that level of training, how to support each individual member, and some may be more complex than others, how do you do that in an environment where you're just trying to do the pitch processing on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think part of the problem is a lot of this research is about perceptions, isn't it? It's like I perceive these things to be the case in my organisation and in the industry. And some of that might come down to that fact that particularly if you've not been through these things yourself, you might say something that you actually don't, that comes across in a way that you don't necessarily mean. Yeah. This could exist with any number of issues, of course, but it may well be that people are saying things that they might mean them lightheartedly or as a joke, or they might just say something in a way that's not necessarily very sympathetic, but they don't necessarily do it on purpose. So I think you're right. I think the sort of the training element is really important. And I guess your question for sort of people who run comms businesses listening to this, how much time have you spent training managers at different levels about being aware of these things, what you should and shouldn't say, really.
Yeah,
and how and the sort of support. Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think this is obviously, there probably are some sort of structural issues around supporting parents, undoubtedly. But I think there's also the sort of nuance of communication with people who report into you as well. So yeah, it's a complex issue, this.
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think it's just as simple as looking at the numbers, which I'm sure the people that took part, they've obviously put initiatives in afterwards because they understand that there is more support that's needed out there.
Personally, I don't really understand how this can be an issue when a lot of managers have children. I feel like they should be a little bit more empathetic to their staff.
Although I do think that, I don't think there should be any more onus on managers because they've had children. I think the onus is on everyone who's a manager and on the people doing the training at the organisations to make sure these things don't happen. Just because you've been through a situation doesn't necessarily mean you're automatically going to be more sensitive. I mean, let's face it, people are overworked, people are feeling tired, people are looking at the bottom line. There are a lot of stress periods to get over the line in terms of budgets, reaching targets and so on. So I think in a way, it almost comes back to that thing about continuous learning again, that we were talking about in the measurement conference. I think this is the sort of thing where if this is done as a sort of tick box exercise once when they start in a company, it's probably going to fizzle out in terms of the impact of this kind of training. So yeah, I think again, it come down to that point about continuously sort of emphasizing these points, but we've got to be aware and have sympathy towards the stress points that exist, particularly when, let's face it, it's a difficult time for PR employers at the moment.
Absolutely. And I think the change of COVID has really impacted most sectors, but it's definitely impacted PR in the way that, that work-life balance is wanted and needed. And the real challenges around that. When I was a kid, it wasn't a case that my parents came to a lot of things, they were working and that was the answer. And it just doesn't work like that anymore. That's not how society works. Things have changed, work's changed. And so I think you're right, John. I think it comes down to policy as maybe as well. I think managers might feel a bit stronger on having more guidelines. We definitely see that in our Best Places to Work award winners, that they've got some real policies behind that can really support their staff. And maybe that's one way of doing it, is really making sure and it's fairer that way. So maybe there's some lessons to be learnt there for some managers.
Yeah, I recommend reading this story, by the way. We'll put a link to it in the blurb about this episode because there's some material there to help people they can have a look at.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks to John and Eliza. And if you've enjoyed this episode, then we'd love it if you could leave a review, please, wherever you access PRWeek's Beyond the Noise podcast. Thanks for listening. Until next time, goodbye.